We have breaking news right now. Protests at Columbia University escalating, with students breaking into and taking control of a university building. Columbia administration now telling students and faculty to avoid campus and warning that access to other buildings may be restricted. Columbia had started suspending students who remained in the pro-Palestine encampment outside there past Monday afternoon. Some of them had been leaving. But shortly after midnight, a student smashed a window of Hamilton Hall with a hammer. The group Columbia Students for Justice in Palestine says that dozens have barricaded themselves inside Hamilton Hall. You can see them here in these images, using furniture and other objects to blockade the doors.
The people who were already inside Hamilton Hall decided to smash the windows and then put bike locks around each door handle.
And you can see the crowd outside here. If you look closely, you can see masked people inside the building attempting to open windows on the upper floors. Hamilton Hall was named for Alexander Hamilton, the Treasury Secretary, and it's famous in part because it was occupied by students back in 1968 amid protests against the Vietnam War. It was taken over again in 1972, also about the war, and then again in 1985 to protest apartheid. It is also the home of the office of the Dean of Columbia College. Our Polo Sandoval has been reporting for us live from the scene, and he is trying to get closer to the building as we speak. He'll join us as soon as he finds a place where he can safely go live. In the meantime, let's talk about it with our panel. Evan Osnos is staff writer for The New Yorker. Republican strategist David Urban is with us, and Karen Finney, former senior advisor and senior spokesperson for Hillary 2016. Good morning to all of you. Some pretty stunning images coming to us overnight, Evan. We also are just learning at this hour that banners have been hung from the hall. They read Hind's Hall and Intifada. Hind is a reference to a woman who was killed in Gaza. Intifada, of course, a reference to uprising, violent struggles that Palestinians have had over the years against Israel. As you watch this unfold, how do you see this moment here for our country?
Yeah, the next few hours, I think, are going to be important to watch. I mean, there was an interesting moment last week. You were beginning to see university administrators come to an idea, a principle. You saw the president of Princeton say the goal should be maximum expression without intimidation or obstruction. That was where places were heading. This is something else, because Jewish students on campus at Columbia are going to wake up this morning and say this does not satisfy that standard.
David Urban?
Yeah, not even just that standard, not just Jewish students, but all students on Columbia. They're being denied. They're not going to have graduations in some of these places. Student life is disrupted. There are thousands of students at Columbia University who are paying and deserve to get a great education, and who are being denied that by a small group of people who are clearly not just breaking the rules, but breaking the law at this point. And at some point, I expect they're going to have to be forcibly ejected. They're not going to leave that building. They're not going to walk out of the building on their own free will. And Governor Hochul is going to be in a tough spot at some point here. I suspect at some point, probably going to have to call the National Guard at some point to quell all this stuff. Right?
That is what they have been trying to avoid, because the administration
right.
thought that would escalate things. And again, just to kind of clarify, there was a deadline of 2 o'clock yesterday for the encampment to disperse. The New York Times reporting this morning that there had been many people who were leaving, and the university had hoped that it would peter out. But then you had this, and let's watch a little bit more from a student who clearly was not siding with the students who have now occupied Hamilton Hall. She talked a little bit more about the scene and what happened when what she calls a mob took over the building. Watch.
Two very heroic students decided to get in front of the mob that was pushing the tables in front of each doorway at Hamilton Hall, and they were trying to almost negotiate with the mob, and then when that wasn't working, they just decided to stand there in front of each doorway and try to be the human barricades. They proceeded to push him out, shove him out, almost lift him up, and he was resisting.
There also was a student who talked about how they called police when the scene unfolded. Watch.
I saw a student get physically assaulted, and people called the NYPD, people called public safety, there's no response. It's utter silence from their end.
Karen Finney, I mean, they are describing trying to call the police, getting no response here. I do want to note earlier, I referred to the child that is on that banner, Hind, as a woman. She's not. She was a 5-year-old girl in Palestine. I just think that's important to note. But let's talk about, as David raised, I mean, they're going to have to do something about this. These campus administrators. What should it be?
Well, look, I think it's at this point, and we're going to see this around the country. I do think Greg Abbott was maybe a little heavy-handed, but it's getting to the point where it's governors and mayors who are having to work, and the local police, with college administrators and their campus security to figure out, for those who are not able to meet the Princeton standard, which I thought was quite brilliant, actually, to say. And I agree with David that, look, also this is private property, that, you have absolutely a right to free speech, not hate speech, which I think is a really clear distinction. I mean, part of what concerns me when I see some of this is we're losing the narrative a little bit, right? It's one thing to say, I am pro-Palestinian, I'm concerned about what's happening to the Palestinian people.
Right.
I am for the Israeli people. I disagree, to disagree with the Israeli government, but make it clear that you do not support Hamas. Make it clear that you are not for terrorists who perpetrated violence of a nature we haven't seen on Israel. And again, I think administrators are going to have to continue to figure out, how do you clarify, you have your right to free speech. You do not have the right to occupy private space.
So got to be super, super mindful. These are institutions. Some of them are private, some of them are public, and it is up to their leadership, university leadership and colleges, to make that decision. Not going to weigh in on that from here.
My panel is back with us now. Karen Finney, she says she's not going to weigh in on that from now. Is that a tenable position, considering what we're seeing?
I think it depends on how it unfolds, and it also depends on what resources private institutions ask for. I think it also depends on how each of these institutions ends up handling their situations, because as we were discussing before, each seems to be taking a slightly different tactic and a different tone. So I think we'll have to continue to see how this unfolds, and I'm sure the White House is as well.
David Urban, how much of this, I mean, do you think that this is, I think the student that we listened to a couple minutes ago would suggest that this is not the majority of students necessarily. How does, these students, and we should note, somebody had pointed out, this is the class of 2024, okay? They were high school class of 2020. None of them had high school graduation.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, this yard where this encampment is where they want to set up for commencement at Columbia University. So a lot of these students potentially denied that.
It's really tragic for those students and their families, and again, the faculty who are, probably in a large part, they want to see, as Karen points out, want to see free and respectful speech. They don't want to see these kind of demonstrations and fear, students living in fear, and the chaos that's on campus. Evan pointed out the previous occupations of Hamilton Hall didn't end well, right? The kids didn't just walk out in 68 and 72 and the past. They were physically ejected by
I think
people.
we have some video of that, actually. Sorry, continue while they bring that up.
And I suspect, to Karen's point, and we saw Corinne from the podium there, when the 42nd, Infantry Division, the New York National Guard, right, is going in to take people out, right?
Here's the students back in 1968.
Yep.
So this is an excellent find. No DOD. I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm probably taking out.
So either
the
NYPD is a very robust police force, right? Yes. And so presumably they won't need to get the National Guard. But when this is happening, when we are seeing on the screen is happening, the White House will be forced to respond from the podium in a big way, and it doesn't bode well for the incumbent. Again, this disruption amongst on American campuses and crime, it feeds into the broader narrative of America being out of control.
You certainly are going to hear Donald Trump making the case that under Joe Biden, it's a chaotic
has
country.
anyone checked Truth Social?
Well, it's worth remembering.
On the way to court this morning, I promise he will.
I'll tell you, a year ago today, I checked it out, thinking about this issue. A year ago today was when, a year ago, 4 years ago, I should say, on whatever it is, April 30th, you had armed protesters going into the Michigan State House. That was under Donald Trump.
Oh, my gosh, yes.
So in a way, it's easy to forget the things that are in the distant memory. But part of the Biden campaign and the White House's project is to remind people what life was like in the spring of 2020. It was not as easy as it sounds.
Two quick things. Number one, I think the White House is certainly watching this and will try to avoid what we just saw from 1968. And the second thing, I just relooked at the Harvard Youth Poll, which I think is one of the best out there. And this issue is actually number 15.
According to James Carville, it's a pretty good poll.
I mean, I
Nice
don't
rant.
care what James says, but as somebody who, I mean, it's a consistent poll. The data is pretty solid. I just thought that was interesting.